When an economic crisis occurs, the first question is usually about blame. Who caused it? Which policy failed? Which decision was wrong? This focus is understandable but structurally incomplete. Crises do not matter most because of how they start. They matter because of how their costs are distributed. Economic losses do not arrive all at once. They move through the system over time. And the people who ultimately absorb those losses are rarely the same ones who triggered the crisis or reacted to it first. This is the central asymmetry of modern crises. Losses are delayed. Responses are uneven. Outcomes depend on position, not intent. From the outside, a crisis looks like a single event. Markets fall. Institutions intervene. Stability is eventually restored. But inside the system, a crisis is a process. It unfolds in phases. Shock, adjustment, redistribution. Each phase shifts the burden. Some actors are able to respond immediately. They restructure obligations. They secure liquidity. They reposition assets. Others cannot. They experience the crisis later, when options are narrower and costs are higher. This difference is not primarily about intelligence or responsibility. It is about timing and access. Time is not neutral in a crisis. Delay is not passive. Every postponement of recognition changes who pays. Losses that are not acknowledged early do not disappear. They are transferred, often downward, often outward, often into the future. This transfer rarely appears as a single decision. It emerges through institutional processes. Emergency measures stabilize markets first. Balance sheets are protected. Liquidity is preserved. The visible system survives. But stabilization does not eliminate loss. It rearranges it. Over time, the cost reappears elsewhere. In wages, in prices, in public services, in long-term purchasing power. By the time these effects become visible, the crisis is already considered resolved. This delay obscures causality. Those who bear the final cost are often disconnected from the initial event. The connection is temporal, not personal. As a result, crises are remembered as technical failures, not distributive processes. This misinterpretation repeats. Each crisis is discussed as an exception. Each response is framed as necessary. Each outcome is treated as unfortunate but unavoidable. What remains unexamined is the pattern. Crises consistently redistribute losses away from those with early access to information, liquidity, and institutional proximity. They concentrate cost on those who respond last, not because the system targets them, but because the system is structured around delay. Understanding this shifts the question. The relevant issue is not who caused the crisis. It is who had the capacity to move before costs became unavoidable. That capacity determines outcomes more reliably than blame. And once this structure is visible, economic crises appear less random and more predictable. Not in their triggers, but in their consequences. In every economic crisis, time becomes the first and most decisive divider. Crises do not unfold evenly. They move through the system in stages. The initial shock is immediate, but its effects are not. Markets react first. Institutions respond next. Households feel consequences last. This sequence is not accidental. Modern systems are layered. Information, liquidity, and authority are not distributed simultaneously. Those closest to financial infrastructure receive signals earlier. They adjust before losses are widely visible. Others encounter the crisis only after adjustment has already begun. This temporal gap determines outcomes. Early actors can reposition. They can refinance, hedge, or exit. They can wait. Late actors cannot. By the time consequences reach them, prices have changed, credit conditions have tightened, and options have narrowed. Time, in this context, functions as a form of privilege. Not privilege in a moral sense, but in a structural one. Access to early information allows losses to be managed. Delayed access converts losses into obligations. This is why crises appear to spare some groups while overwhelming others. The difference is rarely about exposure alone. It is about when exposure becomes unavoidable. In the early phase of a crisis, uncertainty dominates. Values are unstable. Expectations shift. During this period, actors with flexibility can delay decisions. Delay, when voluntary, is advantageous. It allows reassessment. It preserves optionality, but delay is not equally available. For many participants, delay is imposed, not chosen. Contracts must be honored. Expenses continue. Income adjusts slowly. These participants absorb the cumulative effect of the crisis rather than its initial shock. As time passes, stabilization measures intervene. Markets are supported. Institutions are protected. Confidence is restored. From a distance, the crisis appears contained. But containment does not mean resolution. Losses remain embedded in the system. They are simply no longer concentrated. Instead, they are dispersed across time. This dispersion obscures responsibility. No single moment defines the transfer. No single decision can be isolated. The crisis fades from attention even as its effects deepen. For those affected late, the crisis feels disconnected from its cause. Prices rise. Opportunities shrink. Security erodes. But the original shock is already forgotten. This temporal separation reduces resistance. People respond to immediate conditions, not historical events. As a result, delayed losses encounter less opposition than immediate ones. Time acts as a buffer for the system and a burden for those at the end of the sequence. This is why crises rarely end when markets recover. Recovery at the top does not signal relief at the bottom. It signals that redistribution has begun. The later one encounters the crisis, the fewer mechanisms remain for protection. By the time losses reach wages, savings, or public services, adjustment has already been normalized. It no longer appears exceptional. It appears structural. This normalization is crucial. What begins as emergency response becomes baseline reality. Temporary measures extend. Exceptional conditions persist. Those who encountered the crisis late experience its effects as permanent change rather than disruption. Time converts shock into structure. This conversion is one of the least examined aspects of economic crises. Debate focuses on causes and responses, but rarely on sequencing. Yet sequencing determines who absorbs cost. Crises do not distribute losses evenly. They distribute them chronologically. Those with the ability to act early rarely pay the full price. Those who act late inherit the remainder. This is not a consequence of individual behavior. It is a property of the system. Understanding this makes clear that time is not merely a dimension of crises. It is the mechanism through which crises allocate burden. In economic crises, delay is rarely neutral. When losses emerge, they are not absorbed immediately. They are postponed, managed, and reframed. This postponement is often described as stabilization. In practice, it functions as redistribution. Delaying recognition does not remove cost. It changes who ultimately carries it. At the institutional level, delay is a strategic necessity. Acknowledging losses too early can destabilize confidence. It can trigger withdrawals, political backlash, or systemic panic. As a result, systems prioritize containment over clarity. Interventions are introduced to prevent immediate rupture. Liquidity is provided. Obligations are rolled forward. From the outside, this this appears protective. From within the system, it creates asymmetry. Those with proximity to institutions benefit first. Balance sheets are preserved. Markets stabilize. The visible system recovers. But the underlying imbalance remains. Delayed losses do not vanish. They migrate. Over time, they reappear in less visible forms. Wages lag behind prices. Public services face constraints. Households absorb higher costs through everyday transactions. This migration is gradual. Because it is gradual, it attracts less resistance. Immediate losses provoke reaction. Delayed losses normalize. By the time costs become apparent, they are no longer framed as crisis-related. They are framed as economic conditions. This reframing is crucial. When loss is immediate, it demands explanation. When loss is delayed, it appears structural. Delay transforms responsibility into inevitability. No single actor appears accountable. No single moment defines the transfer. This diffusion protects institutions. It also concentrates burden on those with the least ability to respond. Individuals and households operate on fixed timelines. Expenses recur monthly. Income adjusts slowly. Savings are finite. They cannot postpone indefinitely. Institutions can. They refinance. They restructure. They extend timelines. This difference creates a downward shift in burden. Losses deferred at the top are absorbed at the bottom, not through explicit transfer, but through cumulative pressure. Each small adjustment appears manageable. Together, they reshape living standards. Delay also affects perception. People respond to present conditions, not deferred causes. If the cost of a crisis appears years later, it is rarely associated with its origin. This disconnect weakens collective response. The crisis becomes historical. The burden becomes personal. This separation benefits the system. It reduces political risk. It stabilizes authority. But it does not eliminate cost. Instead, cost becomes embedded. Delayed adjustment often persists longer than intended. Temporary measures become permanent constraints. Emergency responses become baseline policy. This persistence further shifts burden. What was meant to absorb shock ends up reshaping everyday life. Importantly, delay does not require coordination or intent. It emerges from institutional incentives. Stability is prioritized. Visibility is avoided. Responsibility is dispersed. Each step is defensible in isolation. Together, they form a pattern in which those with flexibility delay losses, and those without absorb them. This pattern repeats across crises. Different contexts, different instruments. The mechanism remains consistent. Delay protects the system by moving cost away from the moment of disruption. But protection is not free. It is paid for over time, and payment is rarely evenly distributed. Understanding delay as an instrument rather than an accident clarifies who pays. Not those who act first, not those who stabilize markets, but those who encounter the crisis after options have closed. Beyond time and delay, there is a final structural divider in every economic crisis: access to capital. Crises do not affect everyone equally because not everyone can respond in the same way. Some actors can wait. Others are forced to act. This difference determines who absorbs loss. Access to capital provides optionality. It allows refinancing instead of liquidation. It allows holding instead of selling. It allows repositioning instead of retreat. Without access, choices collapse into necessity. Assets must be sold when prices are lowest. Expenses must be covered regardless of conditions. Risk becomes unavoidable. This asymmetry is decisive. In moments of crisis, liquidity becomes more valuable than valuation. Those who can access liquidity can bridge instability. Those who cannot must convert uncertainty into loss. This is not primarily about wealth. It is about structure. Institutions and large actors operate within networks that provide fallback options. Credit lines, central bank facilities, regulatory flexibility. These mechanisms do not eliminate loss, but they defer it. They create time. For individuals and smaller entities, such mechanisms are limited or absent. Income depends on continuity. Expenses do not pause. Credit tightens precisely when it is most needed. As a result, crises amplify existing asymmetries. Those with access convert volatility into opportunity. Those without convert volatility into obligation. This conversion does not require exploitation. It follows from constraints. When forced to act under pressure, actors accept unfavorable terms. They sell assets at a discount. They take on debt at higher cost. They reduce future flexibility. These decisions are rational under constraint. They are also irreversible. Meanwhile, actors with access can remain inactive. They observe. They wait. They acquire later. The same crisis that destroys value for some creates entry points for others. This dynamic is often framed as market efficiency. Structurally, it is a consequence of unequal access to capital. Crises accelerate redistribution not by targeting participants, but by filtering responses. Those who can delay benefit from recovery. Those who cannot become the adjustment mechanism. Importantly, access to capital is not static. It is shaped by institutional proximity. Banks, large corporations, and governments operate closer to monetary infrastructure. They receive support earlier. They receive it at lower cost. They receive it with fewer conditions. This proximity is rarely visible. Support mechanisms are technical. Interventions are framed as neutral. But their effects are not neutral. They determine survival. By the time assistance reaches the broader economy, the critical phase has passed. Markets have stabilized. Balance sheets have adjusted. The remaining task is absorption. This absorption occurs where access is weakest. Wages adjust slowly. Prices adjust quickly. Public services face constraints. The system remains intact, but the distribution of burden has shifted. This is why crises often appear paradoxical. Economic indicators recover. Markets stabilize. Yet living conditions deteriorate for many. The contradiction is structural. Recovery reflects the stabilization of capital. Cost reflects its redistribution. Access determines which side of this divide an actor occupies. This does not imply intentional design. It reflects systemic prioritization. Stability is achieved by protecting nodes critical to system function. Those nodes are defined by access, not by number. As a result, crises consistently protect structures before participants. Those closest to capital experience crises as volatility. Those farthest experience them as loss. Understanding this clarifies who really pays. Not in theory, not by blame, but through constraint. The crisis does not choose victims. The system does. By allocating access unequally, economic crises are often discussed as collective events. Markets fall. Growth slows. Confidence weakens. The language suggests shared impact. Structurally, this is misleading. Crises do not distribute losses evenly across society. They distribute them through mechanisms shaped by time, delay, and access. The total cost of a crisis is not absorbed at once. It moves. It moves away from the moment of shock. It moves away from visible institutions. It moves toward those with fewer options. This movement is not random. Time determines who encounters the crisis first and who encounters it last. Delay determines how losses are reframed and postponed. Access to capital determines who can wait and who must act. Together, these factors allocate burden, not by intent, by structure. Those closest to financial infrastructure experience crises as volatility. They adjust positions. They absorb uncertainty. Those further away experience crises as erosion. They absorb cost. By the time losses reach wages, prices, and public services, the crisis is no longer framed as an event. It is framed as reality. This framing matters. It removes urgency. It dissolves causality. It limits resistance. What was once exceptional becomes normal. This is why crises are often remembered as technical failures rather than distributive processes. The visible system stabilizes. Markets recover. Institutions persist. Yet the effects linger. Living standards adjust downward. Opportunities narrow. Security weakens. These outcomes are not accidents. They follow from how modern systems manage instability. Stability is prioritized at the core. Adjustment is pushed outward. Loss is delayed until it becomes diffuse. This does not require coordination or design. It emerges from incentives. Institutions protect continuity. Markets protect liquidity. Participants protect survival. The combined effect is predictable. Those with early access and flexibility pay less. Those with delayed access and fixed constraints pay more. This pattern repeats because it is effective. It allows systems to absorb shocks without collapsing. It preserves institutional legitimacy. It maintains order, but it does so by reallocating cost rather than eliminating it. Understanding this reframes how crises should be interpreted. The key question is not who caused the crisis. It is not even how severe it was. The key question is where the burden eventually settled. And in modern economic systems, the answer is consistent. Crises do not destroy value uniformly. They relocate it. They relocate cost through time, delay, and access. And those mechanisms determine who really pays.